I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to Three Brothers Filmcast, a monthly roundtable podcast where the brothers behind threebrothersfilm.com have substantial, nuanced conversations about film. I'm Aaron Bergstrom, and I'm here with my brothers,
Anders
And Anton.
My last name is the same as my brother's.
And this month we're carving our jack-o'-lanterns and talking about David Gordon Green's Halloween Ends, as well as offering some horror movie suggestions for Halloween. But first, thank you for listening. If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review and share the show with family and friends. Also remember to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and read our written work at threebrothersfilm.com. And now, on to the show.
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
I was certain that I saw him watching me.
You pretend like you moved on, but you're actually just obsessed with death.
What are you gonna do when Michael comes back for you? Because he is coming.
But this time, something feels different. He's more dangerous.
David Gordon Green's new Halloween trilogy was meant to be a corrective to the increasingly silly sequels and remakes the series produced over the years. It erased the continuity of all but John Carpenter's original film, and jettisoned any of the supernatural elements the series had introduced in the interim. The first film, in 2018, simply entitled Halloween, was a classic requel, a back-to-basics film where Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode was a traumatized survivor waiting for the inevitable day when Michael Myers would break out of prison and return to Haddonfield, Illinois to finish the job. The film dealt with Laurie's dysfunctional life in the wake of the original film, while also repeating many of the narrative beats of the original film, while incorporating Laurie's daughter and granddaughter into the narrative. The sequel, Halloween Kills, effectively acted like the original Halloween 2, with Laurie sidelined in the hospital during its runtime, and the townspeople of Haddonfield ganging up to deal with the rampage of Michael Myers, who leaves an unfathomable reign of destruction in his wake. If Halloween was elegant, Kills was brutal and overstuffed, more grisly supercut than horror film. It was as ridiculous as the sequels its predecessor was meant to overwrite. Now, with Halloween Ends, Green pivots again, and has made perhaps the most peculiar Halloween sequel ever. Most of the film focuses on Rowan Campbell's Corey Cunningham, a young man who, as we see in the opening scene, accidentally kills a young boy on Halloween night and is charged with manslaughter. He becomes a social outcast, and the film charges ostracization and mental deterioration in the aftermath of that fateful night. The film sidelines Michael Myers and has Laurie Strode attempting to get on with her life, while Corey connects with her granddaughter, Allison, played by Andy Matichik. In some ways, the film seems to take inspiration from the pandemic, with the evil of Myers and the town acting as a kind of infectious energy, consuming Corey and transforming him into a monster over the course of the film. Halloween Ends attempts to turn the spotlight away from Michael Myers and show that the hate and fear that he inspires is as damaging to the world as his own psychopathic violence. In Halloween Ends, evil, it seems, is an infectious disease. Laurie Strode even says as much in her closing narration. It's a bold statement, but is it a successful one? Fans of the series have panned Halloween Ends, with many claiming it's one of the worst of the many sequels. But what do you guys think? Is it a successful conclusion, an epic misfire, or simply another strange sequel in a horror series known for strange sequels? Anton, you're relatively new to the series, so what did you think of Halloween Ends and Green's films in general?
I'm someone with no particularly strong affection for the series. In fact, I've only seen the original Halloween, and I've only come to like it recently. So, given that, I enjoyed Green's trilogy. I watched them all for this podcast. I think he's trying to do something interesting, at least with the slasher genre, and for me, that's worth something, because I think a lot of slasher films are pretty boring and formulaic. So the fact that he's trying to do something strange with them, especially in perhaps this last one, but also Kills, I like it.
So do you like all three of them?
I do. I like all three. I think the first is an excellent legacy sequel or requel or reboot.
A diegetic reboot, Anton.
A diegetic reboot, but not a
That's basically
full
what
reboot.
I described it as in our my review a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it is trying to reboot the franchise as its own and get and be like its own sort of like kickstarting, but it is also a sequel to the original. But I liked Kills. I think it's strange. The fact, again, like, because I'm not hugely into slasher films, the fact that it's like mostly about vigilantism and the town going crazy, I kind of liked. I don't mind the sort of David Gordon Green, Danny McBride humor that pops up here and there. Like, I chuckle at it, I laugh. And then just, there's just something a little bit like bizarro about this whole film, like having this Corey guy become Michael Myers. So overall, I enjoyed the trilogy.
What about you, Anders?
I actually really liked Halloween Ends. I'm probably one of the few people who like thought it was like really good. Like, I had a great time with it, watching it. I think the fact that it does something totally different and focusing on Corey and how he is transformed through the ostracization of the town, but also his own sort of bitterness and anger. I loved the sort of like weird like visuals. I liked some of the sort of more atmospheric moments in the film, and also some of the strange humor. Like, it's kind of a funny movie in a lot of times.
Well, that opening sequence, which is both like it's creepy, and then it's like has such a dark punchline.
Oh yeah, like I actually love that opening.
But I laughed because it was like, oh my goodness, they just killed this kid. Like, in the first couple minutes.
It's also one of the rules of Michael Myers doesn't kill kids. That's actually like one of the things that he doesn't do.
That's true. Yeah, because reminds me of one of my, as I said to Anton, one of my favorite bits in the 2018 Halloween. Is when Michael Myers is killing the babysitter, and that one little boy like hops out of his bed. He's like, "Oh shit!" Like,
the little guy,
because he's not gonna get killed. But it's
have you noticed the shot of him in this one walking when they're like getting rid of Michael at the end?
Yeah,
the idea that the whole town has to like purge themselves of him literally by like grinding into a pulp.
Oh man, that's
through like almost a
so
purge
nasty.
It is so nasty. So this is interesting. Yeah, we might be the only.
Do you like them?
I really like the 2018 film. I stand by that. I think it's extremely scary. Like, I rewatched it a couple Halloweens ago because my wife had never seen it, and I stand by that. Like, it returns the kind of terror of Michael Myers. Like, the whole scene in the backyard with the automatic light, I find very scary. And there's some of the scenes of just him. Like, I watch a lot of slasher movies and I've come to appreciate them more. The ones I like the most are the kind of strangely inventive ones, or the ones that work on your preternatural fears. Like, I really love some of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Like, Nightmare on Elm Street's probably my favorite slasher if we're going by like pure slashers. Like, if I'm not talking about Psycho or Peeping Tom or something, right?
Yeah.
Or actually, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but again, that's also a hillbilly horror movie, so it's a different thing too. But so Nightmare on Elm Street's like probably my favorite because it's the idea of like working on that in middle space, right? The dreams, and it's what scares you doesn't really make sense, but the fact that it doesn't really make sense, it makes it scarier. And I thought the 2018 movie kind of did that well with Michael, where he's not supernatural, he doesn't need to be, but he is the boogeyman. And it's the idea that he is that thing, that unknowable. I like that it strips out the psychology in that film. Like, it doesn't matter what drives Michael. All that matters is that he wants to kill. So he's almost like an animal in that sense.
Yeah.
And then the second and third one kind of add more of the psychology back in, right? So I don't love Kills. I don't hate it. I think Kills is like, I like it on a like pure formal level. I think it's kind of brutally entertaining how just the opening scene where he kills like 15 firemen or something.
Yeah, 11, but yeah.
Whatever. But he's got like he's got that buzzsaw and he just goes through the guy, and you're like, oh man, this is like so much more violent already than any other, like the first film or the Green film. But I didn't love it as a story because I didn't like that like Laurie and the deputy Hawkins are kind of sidelined so much, because you don't really get a story there aside from Anthony Michael Hall's character.
Oh, but I thought he was actually one of the better parts of the film. In some
he
ways.
is. The idea of it's exploring what can like this fear do to a person.
Yeah. Which is one of the big themes of this trilogy. But while we're on the topic of kind of just like ranking and comparing them, before we get into other analysis, one thing I will say though is that I think that the first of this trilogy, so Halloween 2018, is so good and probably would be even better if they didn't make these other two.
Agreed.
Like,
because I actually think
you
don't know if he's dead or not at the end.
But also because it has such a great like again, sort of like these punchlines. It has such a great twist punchline at the end where it's like, no, like, this is a trap. Like, this isn't a prison.
Okay, it's not a cage, baby. It's a trap.
And then they're like, so like Laurie has caught him and they just torched him. And then there's like, and then it ends with the, the music, dun, 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 like it just jumps into it. That would have just been really cool if someone had just done that. But so what my thing is just that, like, I like this trilogy, but it itself is already falling prey to all the problems of these like slasher sequels.
For sure.
It starts to keep churning them out. It has to like find ways to keep the story going. So, Michael didn't actually die down here in this fire, because the firemen showed up to get him. And like, so it's starting to do all this stuff that slasher movies are always doing. So
the night didn't end; it's still going.
The other thing that I like about the 2018 film is that it does the thing that a lot of these, what would you want to call them, diegetic reboots or these sort of sequels that kind of go back and revisit the original film, and sort of they're obviously set later on, but they are sort of exploring the same things, like Jurassic World or The Force Awakens. Is that you also get this sort of indictment of like the fandom, right?
Yeah.
With the podcasters who are basically responsible for the true crime. Their love of Michael is what actually ends up in leading to him coming back, right? So it's
they
like,
awaken it.
It almost does like a, I don't know, that's sort of like Michael Haneke like indicting the audience for their own
absolutely
like bloodlust in a way.
But this is an interesting thing about these three Green films, is that because Aaron picked up on, like they're questioning what is evil, and as Aaron mentioned, this whole idea of sort of evil is like something infectious that can spread to other people, and how Michael's infecting the community. But then the other thing that they're obsessed with is fear, also something that spreads, also something within you that you have to deal with. And I think like the way it uses fear thematically is interesting because, right, we watching a scary movie, what are we feeling? We're often feeling fear. So it's like our fear that is generated through watching this film is actually the kind of like electricity that propels this killer to like exist. Like, cause Michael Myers both like kind of like they mention he sort of lives off the fear. So it's actually and this ties into the fact that I also think Green, what he's doing is also he brings in kind of like references to other horror works. Mm-hmm. And whether you like it or not, in Halloween Ends, right, it's a little bit it. Not only does Michael Myers like live in this hole, kind of in the sewers, and he lures you in, but again, in it, feeds on fear.
I think that's probably what I like
something with this
about Halloween Ends is that I know that it's maybe the least like slasherish of some of the films in some way, and it introduces this whole new like mythology and Corey being the central character. But I just found his story really compelling, like what happens to him, and then when he encounters Michael in that like pit under the and then is drawn to kill again, right? Like it's very disturbing, but it has this very Stephen King kind of feel to it, which I like.
Very Stephen King,
so,
and he has to take the mask from him in that like little fight that they have.
Oh yeah, like I also just thought like Halloween Ends was quite well shot. There's a lot of cool scenes. I think like the repeated like views up the staircase in the house when he kills the kid and then going back. Shots like just even shots of like at night riding on a motorcycle in the highway, and it's like being drawn into darkness, almost this Lynchian like Lost Highway kind of like, especially with him and how Allison like become this like dark couple. There's almost a bit of a, I don't know, like, how people say like a Reylo Star Wars Force Awakens, kind of like bringing the, this guy who's sort of the offspring of Michael Myers, if you want to, in a way, with Laurie's granddaughter kind of coming together. There is this kind of like the two of them together who are rejecting the fear and the petty anger and nastiness of Haddonfield, but in very different ways, right?
Yes. So they're doing they're exploring their dark side. And so they're actually doing something that like a lot of superhero movies have to do, and like some of them where it's like, it's not as corny, but like it's like Spider-Man 3, like you know, like a bad Peter Parker.
Yeah.
I love bad Peter Parker.
But you know, like it's starting to do that where like because all of a sudden he doesn't have glasses. Corey doesn't have to have glasses, right, anymore. He's starting to have like new powers, almost like superpowers, and he's like, you know, he's looking at himself in the mirror. I was definitely thinking of scenes in Raimi's Spider-Man where he's like has his spider superpowers and he's checking things out.
It's kind of comic book.
He has awesome.
Yeah, it's
Michael
comic
Myers
booky, right,
murder
Aaron? It's like
powers.
an origin story. Comic book
it's an
origin story.
origin of a killer. That's Halloween Ends is essentially like, you know, these movies deny us a psychological reading of Michael Myers, but Halloween Ends gives us a psychological reading of how you could create somebody like him to do, or somebody who's capable of doing the things like him. And, you know, I don't want to make our conversation kind of just a reaction to people online, but I do think it's very telling that the same people who constantly talk about trauma as a like motivating factor in so many evils in the real world seem to be really turned off by this movie, which seems to show a genuinely victimized young man driven insane by the fact that he cannot escape the shadow of an accident.
Yeah.
And like, it is like fate has pushed him down a lane, and it just, the fact that people never give him a chance is the thing that dooms him.
Interesting to compare this to Rob Zombie's Halloween, the film.
Yeah.
Because in that, he does attempt to provide a sort of psychological background to Michael Myers as this product of like just child abuse and nastiness and things like that. And yet I never found myself like then still like repulsed by like what I'm like trying to understand is Zombie trying to like justify Michael Myers, and his Michael Myers is obviously way more brutal than Carpenter's in the first film or even the couple sequels. But here I was at the same time as I was like, you get this weird like thrill and rush when Corey is like getting back at some of his enemies. Like I thought the scene in the like junkyard that his like dad or stepdad runs was really well done and had some great like shock moments and some like it builds in a sort of a good slasher film should be like a good action film. Not the way Halloween Kills almost becomes like a full-on action film, but in like creating almost like Rube Goldberg-esque kind of like moments, right? And this film, Halloween Ends for me, had some of those. So you have that scene in the junkyard where like it builds what he's going to do to get those teens, right? And then even when he like tries to help like Allie with the doctor and the woman who, you know, the nurse who got the job promotion because she's sleeping with the doctor, like that was a creepy scene too. That was well done.
So what I also find interesting, because you're talking about like how this film portrays the origin of like a killer on some level. But what I find interesting about Green is that he actually sort of he actually has a nuanced view of evil, and going into this sort of like Laurie's monologue or you know, voiceover narration at one point, she's talking. I think this is an excerpt from the novel, or sorry, the book she's working on. Mm-hmm. But she's talking about how evil can be both. It's sort of the external force that is threatening the community, or there's the internal evil, which is sort of you know, like this infection, something within you, lurking within you, like a poison. I don't exactly remember the analogy she uses, but what I find interesting is we take the character of Corey and he combines that. Because what Green is saying is that here are conditions or factors which could create someone who he's experiencing that trauma, and he's also being victimized by people around him, not allowed to have any outlet. So there's all these conditions that sort of like allow it to fester, his resentment, his anger at other people. But then at the same time, it also explores the fact that Corey at certain times makes the choice to continue sort of doing it. So it's not just like he's purely a product of his conditions, yet you need the conditions.
He has agency.
He has agency, but the conditions are important too. And it's that balance, which I thought was actually really smart.
This is what I like about the movie is, and what I alluded to, why the relationship with Allison, which I think a lot of people must hate. I haven't actually dug into any of the sort of fandom, but like the conditions for creating the killer and not providing Corey any kind of like solace or forgiveness for this horrible accident, exist, except for Allison, who is willing to extend it, and he does accept it at first, but then he can't actually believe it at the Halloween party, right? And then that's what leads then to his whole. So he's given the one opportunity to escape from that path, but then he turns to Michael Myers instead of Allison.
But it also goes further than that, because he is given an opportunity of some kind of chance of normalcy or a new start with Allie, but he becomes greedy of it. It's like, you can have only me or your grandmother.
Yeah.
The life. It's like he becomes possessive. He finally gets a taste of like comfort, and he wants it all.
Relationship or community.
And he wants to dominate it now because he's so jealous of it because it's the only crack that he has. So like the thing that I find really interesting about this movie is the way that I think it uniquely speaks to our time, both in its sense of evil and in its sense of the fears that dominate us. So a lot was made, especially after Halloween Kills got bad reviews, of people being like, well, folks, let's buckle up because the next one apparently is commenting on COVID. And I was like, oh, is it going to like be set during COVID, or is that going to be a thing like in the story? I was kind of confused. And then watching this movie, it didn't really click with me initially. And then as the kind of infectious metaphor started playing out, it did become clear that it's like Green and McBride and his writers, they are commenting on the way that it's been demonstrated time and time again about how quickly communities dissolve, how quickly the person on the other side becomes somebody you're not just resentful of, but you want to see dead in a way. Like, you know, it's the idea of fear, as we've seen demonstrated in our society, fear so quickly turns to hatred and then also, you know, a violent intent, if not like an actual violent action, right?
And the person who's the victim of that can also become...
Yes. It's a feedback, because evil's a feedback loop, right? And so this is why I think these movies are quite interesting, and why I think they might speak to us a bit more than some other people, is that I think they take evil seriously on a level of like metaphysical sin, and in how that operates within almost like a theological sense. In that sin is not just the thing within you that you do as a bad thing, but it's also the thing that breaks down the relationships between people and infects the good things and drives you more easily to the bad things, right?
Yeah, and even if someone, a listener, isn't like as you know, spiritual or religiously minded as us, I think that we take genre films seriously, not in the sense of like a lot of people are big genre fans, but we allow for genre films to have something to say about things beyond their own sort of tropes and you know.
Yeah. So this
pleasures.
movie isn't just commentary on slasher films.
Right.
It's
exactly.
actually commenting about evil.
It's not
in
just
the real
it's
world.
not a meta film per se. It's actually just a horror film, like any great horror film, that taps into some sort of real emotions and real possibilities of evil.
And so, why the one? I just have to jump in because the one thing that I want to clarify, like people, if they've read our roundtable a few weeks ago about what scares you, debating the horror genre, and you know anybody who's read me over the years, they know that I have a pet peeve with movies that boil down the evil to some kind of social evil, and so they might be like, Aaron, why does Halloween Ends work for you? On a level beyond that. It's like, well, it's because Corey is not just a metaphor. He's actually also a character, and he's given a lot of development. And the other thing I really like about this movie is maybe not a thing that makes it a horror movie, a successful horror movie, is that it really reminds me of a David Gordon Green drama.
Absolutely.
Like, he gets into this kind of... David Gordon Green has this almost gothic vision of American life at the margins, and there's something romantic to it, but also something dangerous to it. Mm-hmm. And it's these people kind of teetering on the edge of society, right? And they can go either way, and there can be something beautiful to the danger there, but there's also something inherently violent to the danger there.
And this is something that if anyone hasn't seen David Gordon Green's first film, George Washington, it touches on this. There's some sort of echoes of that
imagery
film and imagery in this one, including the.
Do you want to give?
I don't want to spoil that movie for anyone,
okay,
but
spoil it. Okay.
I think if people haven't seen George Washington, you should go back and check
Aaron,
it out.
why don't you elaborate from one of his films then?
So a movie, Joe, with Nicolas Cage in 2013, and it's Nicolas Cage, and he's kind of this rough guy living on the edge. And he takes a young man under his wing who has a bad father, and he kind of decides, I'm going to save this man and save this boy, played by Ty Sheridan, and through saving him, save myself. And that's the tension in the movie, is that Joe is a man driven to violent impulses.
Yeah.
Can he learn to withstand that? And so the tension in the film and the growth is like Joe becomes a kind of father to Ty Sheridan's character, but also, in needing to free Ty Sheridan from his abusive father, he might have to act on the violence that is the very root of the thing that keeps him away from connecting with people, right? That's the tension. And there's a lot of romance to the fact that Nick Cage... I know, Ty Sheridan, you gotta save him always. In Joe, there's a lot of romance to the fact that Nick Cage calls his own shot, in the sense that because he lives on the edge of society, because he's a man apart, he doesn't have to follow the same rules as everybody else, and there's a freedom there, right? Because David Gordon Green's a very American filmmaker, so it's that idea of self-determination, freedom, volition, things like that. And so comparing that to like Halloween Ends, Corey's placement as an outsider allows him the freedom to reinvent himself in ways. It allows him the ability to, if he wants to, remake himself with Allison. It allows him to tap into emotions that he might have buried when he was the straight A kid. And there's kind of you mentioned those shots, Anders, of like them riding the motorbikes, right? Like those shots capture that kind of uniquely American romance of what is the open road, what is the idea of the place with no horizon, and the possibility of a ride at night specifically, right? Because in American cinema and American culture, the idea of driving around at night has this almost romantic
it's freedom and danger, because
you could kill yourself.
Well, and they're not wearing helmets. But the whole thing about that is
crazy.
But the thing about that, right? Like, because essentially the American one of the American views of that freedom is, right, like it'll always inherently increase the possible chances of danger or something bad happening, but like that's worth it. That's he's exploring themes like that, the way he's into the nature of violence. There's like, this is someone who clearly like understands aspects of the Western genre, the way towns tribalize. I mean, we're talking about COVID, the way you break down into different forms, and someone becomes the external threat or evil to your community, where you divide the lines on those communities forms that.
And you have to purge yourself of their evil lest it infect you, right? Like,
evil dies tonight.
And he has the radio DJ.
Yes, I was just going to mention
amping
that.
up everyone the whole time.
Yep.
So Green
with
also
wild
like,
stories.
Green is very good at like tying his films, whether they're goofy stoner comedies like Pineapple Express or like the horror films like this, into those like American myths and sort of classic sort of characters and things. Violence is often, even in Pineapple Express, it explodes in pretty brutal violence in the end. This
Red, you're alive, Red. Hey guys,
Danny McBride's so good in that. But this film, like that. So they have the night driving, and then the radio DJ. It's almost like even harkening back to like American Graffiti. And,
totally.
Jack, and like
totally.
This voice that like sort of ties the community together and stuff like that.
But even the casting of Corey, like Rowan Campbell, kind of looks like a Ron Howard type.
Yeah, but I just want to say I was really impressed with his performance. I had never seen him in anything. He's mostly just on TV and stuff. I thought he was really good.
Yeah, he doesn't push it to like his character could easily be performed at like, basically it could have veered into either camp or huge like scene chewing, like, but he actually he doesn't do that.
No.
Hi, you've reached the Corey hotline. $4.95 a minute. Here are some words that rhyme with Corey: glory, story, allegory, Montessori.
Man, you guys are starting to make me like this movie even more than I thought.
No, I know. See, this is the thing, but it's a weird movie because when you're doing the so-called final statement on the most iconic slasher franchise, it's a very strange route because Michael Myers doesn't show up for an hour, and the movie's not even a horror movie for an hour. It's literally this like, Yeah, drama on romantic drama about the people on the margins.
I was like, watching it, I was like, oh, are they like making this movie about like, is this kid gonna turn into like Michael Myers?
And they did.
Yeah.
But so when they start bringing Michael Myers in, and they're using him as almost like a totemic figure, right here,
Yep.
which draws back into how some of the other sequels deal with him. Those in more of a literal sense, in that he's literally a like druidic totem of evil that like you suck all this evil into in the community, and he purges it and so forth.
I think Michael is under the influence of an evil rune.
Thorn. I saw the symbol marked up where we found Jamie stabbed.
Well, there are runes of light, protection. If Thor could somehow be trapped by these runes, the energies could cancel themselves out. The evil could be destroyed.
But here, it's more operating on the metaphorical level and that level of like iconography.
Mm-hmm.
But the Laurie stuff is also interesting because Laurie kind of lurks in the background and she encourages this romance, right? Yeah. Because it's a possibility it's a possibility of Allison to express herself, and it's a fresh start for Corey. And as a person who's been an outsider for the entirety of her life, she has a natural sympathy. But she also sees beneath the surface and sees the anger and the violence inherent because she has it in herself.
Exactly. Going back to the 2018 film. And what the film really does, which is something that was very often not commented on in our society, is that fine line between how both victims and perpetrators can be ostracized. Like, I think it's something that we're starting to understand, but like the people who are victims of violence are often then stigmatized by.
There's the scene where she
violence.
walks out of the grocery store in Halloween Ends, and someone's like, "It's you. It was your fault."
Yeah.
Like you like to Laurie, like saying that she caused it. Yeah, so there's definitely times where it's like essentially she's also excluded from the community. And if she's not like sort of the evil external, but by being an outsider, that also links her with Michael. And like, I mean, that's ways that Green's, very interested in is, the link between Laurie and Michael.
But while seeing some of the stupider stuff from the other sequels that has.
Okay. Is
Laurie
this the
being
time
Michael's
I don't know, like
little sister, so.
Oh.
Okay. So that's in Halloween 2, Anton. So you haven't seen any of the sequels, right, Anton?
No.
Okay.
I've only seen the first Halloween.
So should we do a lightning round as Lex G would coin?
Sure.
Let's do it.
I haven't seen everything. I'm not a completist, but
okay. So there's Halloween 2, 1981, not directed by Carpenter, but it's the second half of the night. It literally starts with the final shot of the original Halloween. It's Laurie goes to the hospital. Michael tries to kill her. Loomis is going around, we have to stop Michael, he's still on the loose. And don't you know, she's actually his sister.
Yeah.
So it brings that.
I do actually kind of like that movie. I like Donald Pleasance. I also love the, he's got some great kills in the hospital.
Oh, the boiling water kill is so horrifying.
So she's his sister. Okay.
Yes. And it's the idea, so it's, I don't know what the terminology would be in like Greek sense, but it's like a psychosexual obsession with the sister. And it comes up again and again. So then you get Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, the only anthology version of the entire franchise, where Carpenter's like, we should make this a anthology series where you have like weird stories set at Halloween, and it's all about Stonehenge and like these kids' masks that are going to make kids turn into like worms.
And the most annoying jingle of all time.
Oh, so good. Happy, happy Halloween.
Happy, happy Halloween, 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 happy, happy Halloween, silver shamrock. Happy, happy Halloween, 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 happy, happy Halloween, silver shamrock.
It's almost time, kids. The clock is ticking. Be in front of your TV sets for the Horathon. And remember the big giveaway at 9. Don't miss it. And don't forget to wear your masks. The clock is ticking. It's almost time.
I actually, again, I reviewed that for the website. It is also kind of a proto They Live in some ways.
Mm-hmm. And it's
expressing the way that commercial society has this underlying lurking evil and
Well, also riffing on Romero in that sense too.
Yeah.
And then you get Halloween 4 Return to Michael Myers, which is essentially a diegetic reboot where now we have Laurie's cousin or something. I forget the character's name, but it repeats the whole there's a little girl being babysat, Michael Myers comes back, Laurie's killed off screen in those movies. What? And then it's the whole thing. Michael terrorizes this little girl. Loomis is involved again. It kind of repeats, but it's at a lower budget. It's very similar to actually Psycho 2, where it repeats but then extends the like prurient nature of the kills or the like sexual stuff further than the original did. And then you get the fifth one, which is The Curse of Michael.
It's Revenge. Curse is number 6.
Revenge is really bad. It's a continuation of Return of Michael Myers. It follows the little girl from that one, who at the end kind of is placed into the position of Michael Myers, and so it's exploring the blood relationship between the two of them. But the big issue there is that most of the film is literally just Loomis saying meaningless stuff and the little girl crying. She's like rendered non-verbal within a mental hospital, and so the vast majority of the film is literally just her wailing and acting baffled by everything that's happening, while a even lower rent Michael Myers kills a bunch of people. And then you go to 6, and 6 is the one with Paul Rudd
as the same character who's in Halloween Kills, played by
Michael Hall, the little boy who is being babysat. And the whole thing with Curse of Michael Myers is that it unveils the druidic power of Michael Myers, and that he is this channel for the evil in the community. And it's very goofy, and there's underground labs, and like the government is somehow involved with keeping Michael Myers going because it's like a cleanse.
Oh, crazy.
Very silly. That one kind of effectively killed the franchise, and then you get H20.
H2O.
Yeah, H2O.
I kind of like
20
H2O.
years later, which is a Screamish style, where
Very much.
it's a meta slasher.
Oh, yeah?
With like Josh Hartnett and a bunch of other like young hunks in like the 90s.
Yeah.
He plays the son of Laurie. It brings Laurie back. It's like, I thought Laurie died. It's like,
But
no,
it ignores
that was
the
just
3, 4, 5, and
exactly.
6. Yeah.
3's not really part of the continuity of the others. And
Also fun, it has Janet Leigh in it.
yeah. It has, I think Joseph Gordon-Levitt's in the opening scene getting killed with a hockey.
Yeah.
What year is that one?
98.
Oh, okay.
So 20 years
So
after
it has
the
a
first.
Aaron's right, is very Scream like, and
It's
it's
trying to be
probably
Scream.
one of my top 3 or 4 of the series. Yeah.
I like it. It's fun. It's quite fun. And it's slickly shot and stuff.
It's not super scary though.
No, but it's enjoyable. And then Resurrection was the few years later, and it kills off Laurie again in the opening scene in this really bad scene. And it's like, oh, we're going to lock people in a haunted house for a reality show. Oh no, Michael's in the house.
It's directed by Rick Rosenthal, who did number 2 though, right?
I know, it is. Which is really disappointing.
Then
we
get the zombie.
Then you
Rob
get the Rob
film.
Zombie remakes, which are like straight up remakes of 1 and 2. The whole thing with Rob Zombie's first one is that the first half of the movie is Michael's a child, and then it catches up to where 1 starts.
So it deeply psychologizes.
Yeah.
Yes. To a point where I actually find it like distasteful.
Yeah, I only saw the first one and I did not like it. Yeah.
And then the second one is again like a pure remake of number 2, but extends it where it follows Michael at the end of the night, and then it continues on, and it becomes this almost like dark opera of Michael Myers. It's very operatic and very like trying to be true tragedy. With Taylor Mayne plays like Michael Myers in it, like the guy who was Sabretooth in the X-Men
Yeah, he's a
movie.
wrestler, right?
Yeah, and so he's like a bad actor, but he's just this giant hulking monster, and it's lots of him walking around with like a blood-soaked. His mask is also made of like skin or something in it. It's very. Some people really like this movie, and they claim it's like one of the great horror films. I don't really like it, but I also think it's really interesting. It's my favorite zombie film I've seen, but it's not saying much because I hate some of his films.
Okay, so
and that brings us to the Gordon.
And then this brings us to Green.
Yes, and so you had roughly a decade between the Rob Zombie and
it was because 2009 was the second Rob Zombie.
So here's my question then, and then maybe we can get into what in your view, having seen a lot of these. I know there's different versions and different takes on Michael Myers in these, but like, what do you think? What is Michael Myers, and how are we to understand him? And then is David Gordon Green doing something different, or is he like distilling things that are in these other ones? Like, is Michael Myers, like, is he a boogeyman? Is he evil?
I think
is he pure manifest evil?
Well,
is he a child
Dr.
who's
Loomis
like been psychologized?
repeatedly tells us pure evil. He's pure evil. Well, but Loomis also kind of comes across as like a bit insane himself. But like the dude literally locked up a 8-year-old, 10-year-old boy for killing his sister for like 20 years, and like that might like mess him up.
I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left. No reason, no conscience, no understanding, and even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, of good or evil, right or wrong. I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up, because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
I kind of do buy the whole thing. He's sort of like the boogeyman. There's something like very primal and atavistic about Michael Myers.
Yeah.
I still love the original film the best. I think it works so well. It's actually pretty subtle in a lot of ways, weirdly. And it's about all the things that creep you out at night, the possibility of something, the bad things that have happened in your community that come back to like haunt, and the fear of the shape. He's not even called Michael Myers, right? He's like the shape is what he's credited as, that will come and kill the babysitters, right?
So why does Michael kill his sister in that movie, do you think? Like, should we
in
not
the original
have an
film,
explanation?
she's not his sister, right? Like, it's just
in the opening scene when he kills
Oh, in
his
the
sister.
opening scene.
Yeah,
I think it is.
why does
I think
the
there
boy-
is I think, though, so what I was going to say is I also think that there, in saying, if you want to say atavistic, it's like this primal thing. It's also it connects to like the confusion and misunderstanding that young kids can have around sex and sexuality, and like misdirecting that in different ways. So it's about that sort of Freudian link between like sex and death.
Yes.
So that's partly why I like it. It's a very Freudian film in a lot of ways. It links those things. And so, yeah, the shape is just, born out of our confusion and fear. And it is evil. Like, I don't know if it's like pure evil in the way Loomis phrases it, but it's definitely like evil, and it's definitely about disordered and messed up understandings and things like that. And I think Green and McBride and the crew who make the new films, they do get that. My biggest complaint with Halloween Kills is that they over literalize, like, number of times characters are like, he's the boogeyman, he was all, like, they spell out everything that
Evil
he represents.
ends tonight.
Yeah.
Evil dies tonight.
So, Aaron, what do you think? Like, do you think, like, how do we understand why Michael kills his sister in the original, and then is, like, Green picking up on stuff in that? Is he doing anything different?
So, kind of going back to my comment I made about slashers and horror movies in general that I really like, which is that I think they tap into these kind of unconscious fears or things that they make sense on like an emotional level, but they don't necessarily have like a literal one-to-one. And I think Michael Myers in the original is really preying on, he's that totemic figure that represents fear, right? Like a true unknown fear, whether it's a fear of, adulthood, a fear of sexuality, a fear of the thing that can come in the night, a fear of the dark, a fear of being alone, a fear of the idea of just death that is always coming for you. Michael in the original, I think it's important to have the kid thing at the beginning, to have this idea of like he is going home. Michael comes home, right?
Yeah.
And so Michael is going back to the source, which is the home in Haddonfield, which Laurie lives in, which like it's this idea of we are returning to the primal impulses, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't actually matter what Michael is as a character. That's why it's important he has a mask. It's why it's important he doesn't show any emotion. He doesn't run. He doesn't pant, really. Like, he doesn't really get angry. He just goes forward and kills. And I think that's super important, because then you just, like, it doesn't matter what's under that mask, because it's whatever terrifies you and is coming for you in the night.
But I also think it's interesting in the first film that opening scene, the other notable thing,
us.
It's all point of view of us.
Yeah,
right?
it's us killing the girl.
Yeah.
Which is the person who watches horror movies is driven by these same things in a way, and also scared of these same things, so it's almost a mirroring at us. And Green's films draw that out a little more, I think, where they make Michael truly a mirror of the like dark impulses inside ourselves. The first of the Green films, I think, is playing a lot with him, the idea of like he is just the dark, right? Like he is the boogeyman. He is the idea of like the fact that there's 40 years between the original one and the Green one in the story world as well. But there's an inevitability of the fact that Michael will come back, because death always comes for you, because the dark, the sun always sets, because you're going to be alone always. Like, it's the inevitability of something that scares you coming back at you, while kills and ends, I think, extend that out to more specific places.
So do you guys think that, like you've both said that you think that Green is like getting rid of any sort of, like, I don't know whether you want to call it magic or supernatural aspect to Michael Myers, but do you think like in ends that like how do we understand Michael in like that sewer or the tunnels? And he's been there for like 5 years or
4 years, right? Yeah.
4 years.
Yeah.
Like to me, like there's something in partly because I couldn't help but see it as being kind of like this.
Is he asleep and he wakes up kind of thing?
I don't
almost?
think that they completely strip away anything like supernatural, but I do think they get rid of like this sort of like silly like myth like.
They don't want any. They don't want any
strip it
mythology
down.
that you could uncover to explain.
Exactly. There's
But
no.
there might be
explanation.
insinuations.
It's still supernatural, but the whole point is that there's no explanation. I think the lack of explanation is really important
for why they basically have to crush his body into absolute pulp in order to stop him.
Just like a Halloween pumpkin when they're like Halloween.
They basically have to do like a surgery to kill someone in this one, where they like have him down on the table and stuff. Like it's. I mean, this movie, like it's
pretty brutal.
Yeah, they're trying to cut out the wound of the community, right? That's
some of the scenes are pretty brutal for sure, and we get a moment where it's like, the one, like someone's basically eyes are being popped out, but like like. You don't usually just sort of see that like full on where like a face is crushed.
Or Michael's hand being like sliced in half.
Yeah.
The whole, so before we kind of close the conversation, I do want to talk about this as a conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So like, is it satisfying as a conclusion as the final showdown between Laurie and Michael? Because it does delay Michael so much, and it really just has the one fight between them. Yeah. So like, what do you guys think?
I can see why someone who just wanted that like might be disappointed, but I think it does enough other interesting things to make it satisfactory. And there's enough nice little callbacks to the original. Like the fact that when Corey's babysitting the boy at the beginning, one, they mentioned, well, he doesn't kill kids. Michael Myers only kills the babysitters. And two, they're watching the John Carpenter thing instead of the original thing. Like that.
Are they watching? They're watching the old.
Thing from
in
another
the
world.
1978 Halloween, Laurie and the kid are watching the Howard Hawks thing, and then. Which was sort of a call forward to what Carpenter would do.
Yeah.
And then also the fact that the song at the end of the movie is like Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult, which is what Laurie and her friend are listening to when they're driving around in the car in the original film. So there's callbacks. There's enough little Easter eggs for fans. I mean, like, come on. What more do people want? I don't know.
I kind of just feel like I liked it. I sort of like these as a trilogy, but as the conclusion to, if they're trying to say that this is like the end of the franchise, I mean, I'm obviously doubtful that they'll make more, but I think just Halloween 2018 would have been more satisfying as like a conclusion to the actual series. But
I'd like this Laurie Strode story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I just feel like Laurie Strode's not like huge in this. The final fight is probably better when it was like the build up to her like crazy house she's built.
Her Home Alone house.
Yeah. I think I might prefer like the scene where she kills she fights Corey. Like I really like the whole thing of it's a misdirection where you think she's gonna shoot herself. It's like you wouldn't actually think I'd commit suicide, and like shoots him. When she's got the pumpkin, you're like, why does she have a pumpkin sitting there? Like, why is that? What's with the safe?
I liked the pumpkin scenes in these three movies, and the pumpkin scene in Ends was very intriguing. Like the pumpkins within pumpkins.
Oh, the opening credits, yeah.
Sorry, the opening credits scenes with the pumpkins.
Because that's
right?
what
So
the
the first one,
like.
the first one has the pumpkin rising from.
I love
reverse. I thought that was great, and then the second one has.
Is it on fire
or? Tons of pumpkins, like one pumpkin, then many pumpkins, and then on fire, and then in Halloween Ends we get pumpkins within pumpkins, and at the very end it sort of zooms in on a pumpkin from the backside, like as if to sort of get inside, and you just sort of see the mush there, and then the movie visually references that like throughout. Like people are carving pumpkins and holding it, and then the fact that her misdirection at the end when she shoots the pumpkin, not her own head, is very like that to me is why like I mean I think this is just also a good example of like that Green's like a talented filmmaker. Like he picks up on a visual motif like that, uses it throughout, but then it's quite evocative symbolism at the beginning of this idea that kind of there's the the Halloween within you, the Michael Myers within.
Is it possible that some of the dissatisfaction of this film as a conclusion is the fact that Michael is a unkillable, inevitable villain, in the sense that like the thing that makes him so terrifying is the fact that you can't kill him. He just never ends. Like, he just always comes back. And so trying to think of this as like an actual conclusion will never make sense because the character defies sense in a way.
Yeah, but this is as much the end of Michael Myers as No Time to Die is the end of James Bond.
No, of course,
Right?
of course. And I can't wait for, 5 years from now, Halloween again or something
No,
like that.
we're gonna get David Gordon Green and Danny McBride are gonna make a Christine. They're gonna remake that, but then Michael Myers is the dark spirit within the car because some of his blood got inside of the car or something. They tear him up at the garage.
David Gordon Green should actually just straight up do a Stephen King adaptation.
Yeah, actually, that would.
I think he could do a good job.
I would like to see him do Carrie. I know we've had multiple Carries, but I actually think his outside. Yeah, but his outsider look at Carrie. Just imagine.
Can we cast what's her name from Righteous Gemstones as Carrie's mom? No.
But you have to. I mean, I guess Carrie would be a good choice for Green. He can't do one of the ones where like King gets into too much sort of like his mythological worlds and starts spinning out the fantasy stuff. Because that I don't know if Green would do as well. But I think
no, he wouldn't do a Dark Tower or even.
Even like It, right? Like
yeah,
It becomes too much of like a fantasy world like thing.
So I think this might be the only podcast that you listen to where all three recommend Halloween Ends.
Roger Ebert style, thumbs up.
So Halloween Ends is still currently playing in theaters. I think it's making decent money still, which is the other thing that is unsaid about these movies. They're Blumhouse productions, right? So they're lower budget. This one is like $30 million, which is pretty high budget for a Blumhouse, but it's already made like $85 million.
Also looks really good for that budget.
It's because Green is a really good visualist. And also, like,
first one made a ton, right?
Yeah, I mean, 160 million or something. Yeah. Massive hit. I've met David Gordon Green, so I also just personally like him. He's a nice guy.
Goodbye, Michael.
So it's Halloween horror season, and as we're likely to do probably every October on this podcast, I thought we could all go around and offer a few horror movie suggestions and maybe just talk about what we've been watching over the past few weeks. Anders, let's start with you. So what horror movies have you been watching, and do you have any recommendations that listeners should watch?
The main thing that I've been doing is watching all the Exorcist films, and I'll have a ranking that you'll be able to find on the website just before Halloween.
He hasn't been sleeping all week.
Yeah,
it'll probably be out by the time you listen to this.
It will probably be up by the time you hear this. And out of those, the one that I think I'd only ever seen the original Exorcist, and I hadn't watched it in a long, long time, so it's been fun to revisit that one and see the sequels. And Exorcist III, Legion, the William Peter Blatty film, is actually really good with George C. Scott in it. I really liked it. I think it's a good film. It's kind of different take on an exorcism demon movie in that it's like also kind of like a serial killer procedural cop movie. And it's actually genuinely scary as well.
Incidentally, who is this Damien you mentioned?
Don't you know?
I know nothing, except I must go on killing Daddy. I must shame him.
And the other one, as in our Roundtable, I really liked Prince of Darkness quite a bit, but you can read some of my comments there on that. And the other film that I've been stuck with me this Halloween was, I hadn't watched it since high school, but Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, which is barely a horror. Well, it's truly horrifying in that it's not really meant to be enjoyable at all. It's almost more of a, like I said, John Cassavetes film. It reminds me of something like these portraits of like sort of working class people in despair, and it's very dark, but it's really good film. Michael,
I was encouraging you to watch that again because it was on Criterion.
But
so Anton, you should watch that. It's only 80 minutes.
Yeah, but just be prepared. It'll shake your soul. It's like
Michael Rooker's very good.
He's very good in it. And it almost reminded me a bit, Aaron, of like I mentioned the film Wanda, by Barbara Loden's Wanda, which is a strange thing, but it's like there's not a lot of films that pay attention to these people on the margins and how the way they really live, and like the sort of like these characters are sympathetic in a way. So maybe Henry's also kind of a like Corey in Halloween Ends kind of figure in some ways, but has given in to some of the darkest impulses.
He's also based off a real person.
Oof.
So it's his crimes. Him and Otis are actually like analogs to a real serial killer pair. That's why it's Portrait of a Serial Killer.
It's a genuinely great film. So,
Anton, what about you?
I watched Hocus Pocus 2. And I'm bringing this up not because I recommend it. So my wife is a big fan of the original from like childhood. I've rewatched it, or I've watched it a number of times with her. I'd never watched it as a child. So I come at the original Hocus Pocus completely differently than most people who say they like it. So I actually like the original Hocus Pocus. I don't have any childhood nostalgia for it. What I see it as is kind of like almost a last gasp of these 80s, early 90s fantasy family movies, kind of like The Goonies, or maybe like Joe Dante, things like that. Obviously Spielberg. And what I like about it, it has these aspects of that era where it's like you get teen characters, then you also get young children, and they're interacting. They'll each have their sort of separate storylines, but they're sort of connected too. It's a movie that's purposely campy with Bette Midler and stuff like that. That's fine. And then the old one from 90, 93, 94, 95, I can't remember. The witches are actually bad, even though, the audience will like them and enjoy them and have fun with them. It actually sets up that they're witches from Salem and they were killed and they were bad. And of course, in Hocus Pocus 2, now all witches have to be outsiders. So, they still want to consume children in order to give themselves immortality, but they're also misunderstood. And it's things like that that make Hocus Pocus 2 so bad for me, beyond just the sort of I'm not going to spend any more time on it. It is just sort of like a Disney tween, Disney Channel tween movie, but it's not particularly well shot or made, but it's the fact that it displays all this live action Disney.
Are all the three
that annoys
actresses still returned to play the witches?
Yes, and I will say that all three actresses, so they got them back.
So Sarah Jessica Parker, Bette Midler, and
I can't remember the third.
Catherine Najimy. She was in a lot of early 90s.
Yeah.
Stuff,
yeah. They're definitely like kind of the highlight of the movie. Like this time, like you don't like the kids, the modern kids, and they also, of course, have to make the modern kids like also kind of like witches who have a little coven, which again gets in. It's sort of it wants to sort of revise the original, but at the same time they can't make them totally like the totally bad Sanderson sisters actually fully good. So it's just sort of muddled, kind of a mess.
Just like my old one. Oh, well, what about us? There's only one?
That's and Beatles, find something, anything, we must fly!
Anything.
My groupies are misbehaving. Uh-oh. Winnie, I'm surfing, cowabunga.
So, I mean, I would just say, like, again, it was just confirmation for me that I should just stop watching these Disney remakes, reboots. In terms of other stuff, the only thing I thought I'd mention was, like, so by the time this comes out, I'll have a piece on Nosferatu out. We all watched it back in March. And I just think I'd encourage anyone in this final few days before Halloween, try watching a silent horror movie. They actually have a great hypnotic power, especially if you watch it alone, really late at night, and just let yourself sort of get into them, because it almost has the feeling of like a lucid dream. Like you start to like, there's a strangeness about a silent horror film if you give yourself the sort of the conditions and time to appreciate it, that it can be, it's not scary the way that, modern horror movies are, but it can be very, very creepy and unsettling if you sort of create that space. So I'd definitely encourage it. And I'd recommend if you either Nosferatu, but also Faust is great. Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, like they have such amazing sets.
Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah. Definitely check some of these out. A lot of these German expressionism ones are amazing. The Phantom of the Opera is actually, the reveal when the Phantom takes off his mask is actually genuinely like you like jump back. It's creepy because the makeup's so good.
I love old horror movies from like even the early sound era. Like last year watching the...
You've been watching a lot of the Universal ones, right?
Universal films, yeah. I did last year. I watched through those on Criterion Channel, and then a few years ago, a little bit later, but like the post-war Val Lewton films. I love all of those things there. There's just a good... They have a nice vibe to them, the like kind of.
They have such good atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly. Aaron, what do you recommend?
So I went to see Pearl the Ty West prequel to X, and I kind of loved it. And I have a review up on the website, but I kind of can't stress enough how interesting a movie that could have been in kind of naked franchise extension is. It's a total like performance tour de force for Mia Goth. The fact that it's quite low budget, but West tries to do a lot within that low budget and really make it like a pastiche of early Hollywood movies, not just with his font and color style, but also like the editing choices. He has musical sequences and things like that, and it's quite ambitious for a movie, but it all kind of centers around Mia Goth being in a way a portrait of a psychopath, a portrait of a serial killer in her own right, and she really sucks you in to the point where it's quite alarming how much you are on her side in that film, despite the like horrible things she does. So I thought that was really excellent for new movies.
I'm leaving soon. I can't stay here any longer. Howard was supposed to take me away. It'd be easier for me if I didn't feel like I was abandoning you. You understand that? I love you, Daddy, but this is no way to live.
I've been going through the 80s horror collection on Criterion Channel and watching a lot of those. So I watched, kind of semi-disposable slashers like Slumber Party Massacre, which is kind of funny because it's like written and directed by women, but it's really playing into the lurid nature of slasher movies and
I
kind of
haven't
makes
seen
fun
it,
of
but
it.
there's film theorists or professors who made it, right, or something?
Yes, exactly. And so it's really playing into the fact that like the slasher killer is just like a sexually frustrated male, and the killer in the movie is this guy in a jumpsuit who has a giant auger that is like supposed to be his penis kind of thing, and he's like, I'm gonna drill you kind of thing. So the most famous shot in the movie is him standing over the girl like cowering with his auger in between his legs, and it's like that's the kind of imagery. It like plays so obvious and making fun of it, but it's got some good tension. It's very low budget. I did watch the Tobe Hooper Funhouse, another one of his like hillbilly horror movies, but like a weird mutant in a broken down carnival ride that's like terrorizing people. And I don't love hillbilly horror movies, but it is creepy. It's a movie that's so very obviously the influence for the House of a Thousand Corpses, like the Rob Zombie movie. It's clearly like the one he's trying to be. But probably the most interesting horror movie I watched of the older ones is Tetsuo the Iron Man, which is this horrifying body horror cyberpunk movie by Shinya Tsukamoto, who is this like 80s Japanese underground filmmaker. And so it's about a man turning into metal, and it's some of the most strange and impressive and disgusting imagery you'll ever get on screen. He did all the special effects himself, and it's like, so he has like a little, one day when he's shaving, he has like a little piece of metal on his cheek, and when he like can't cut it, and when he touches it, it like squirts blood, and then it starts getting larger, and then other body parts start turning into metal and machine parts, and it is tied into his sexual impulses with his girlfriend and goes places that are just insane. Like there are a few movies that will make your like jaw drop more than this film, and to the point where I think some people would watch it and be like, this is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen, but a sicko like me who's seen a lot of horror movies is like, wow, good job, you've actually done something that I find like phantasmagoric and horrific in like very unique ways. So that was very good. It's a good movie. I don't think you can kind of talk about 80s body horror without mentioning that, especially as it's a Japanese view on it, especially when Japan was kind of at the height of its economic powers. The only other movies I'll mention is they're also in that 80s horror series, but I did watch The Hidden. Have you guys heard of this movie?
No.
It's directed by Jack Shoulder, and it's essentially a buddy cop movie, but the one cop is Kyle MacLachlan right after Blue Velvet, and they're hunting down a series of men who go on killing sprees, but they're all inhabited by a alien that like when the one man dies, it like passes into the next man and continues the killing spree. And so it's like a sci-fi movie of these, and Kyle MacLachlan is an FBI agent who like mysteriously comes in to have to do it. So it's if you like Twin Peaks, you kind of have to check it out. He's very charismatic and weird in it, and it's just kind of one of those fun late 80s cop movies, but the element of horror and science fiction kind of adds an extra interest to it. And I did, just to cap it off, watch Stuart Gordon's From Beyond, his second Lovecraft film from the 80s, also starring Jeffrey Combs. So it's an adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft. It was made a year after Reanimator, and it's got a lot of the same energy of the mad conflagration of sexual impulses and monstrosities. It's pretty funny.
I should rewatch it. I should watch that because I reviewed Reanimator for our site last year, it holds up.
Why is this one not as well known? Or seemingly,
I think it's a little bit harder to get a hold of, and I think
there's always sort of independent DVDs and like Blu-rays of Reanimator.
Yes,
right?
So this is playing on Canopy, so you can. It's only 80 minutes, so it's like a really easy watch. I think the other thing is that Jeffrey Combs is playing Herbert West Reanimator in Reanimator, right? Mm-hmm. And in this one, he's the main character, but he's like the sidekick of the main scientist. And I think the fact that it's not like the wacky Jeffrey Combs role makes it a little less famous, because he is really wildly weird in Reanimator.
Yeah, and it has Barbara Crampton from Reanimator as well, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Is it based on a Lovecraft story?
Yeah, it's based on From Beyond, like the
From
short
Beyond.
story.
I haven't read that one.
So it's essentially just a scientist stimulates the pineal gland, which allows you to like view into like another dimension, and these monsters, like if you move, they attack you. But the whole thing is that he does it so that he can like tap into beyond fleshly pleasures, kind of thing, like the scientist guy does. And so there's a lot of weird S&M imagery, which is it made 1 year before Hellraiser, but it seems to actually have a lot of kind of Hellraiser influence in there. So I think it's kind of a stepping stone onto Clive Barker. So yeah, we didn't mention any of the bad movies, but there are plenty of bad horror movies. So like,
hey, I mentioned a bad one, Hocus Pocus.
Well,
2.
yeah,
don't watch
number
it.
2.
It's a waste.
But
yeah,
stick to the good ones.
Stuff like Exorcist II, which I'm sorry, people who want to say it's a hidden gem, it's not. It's terrible. And The Keep, which is definitely Michael Mann's worst movie, but at least it's got some. The first half is actually pretty good.
Mostly for purists, though.
A truly bewildering movie.
Definitely.
But, if you're still looking for recommends, we have so many Halloween horror reviews now on the site from over a decade of doing this. So
yeah, we have around 70 on the site. So plenty of stuff to work through in all different decades, all different eras and styles of horror. So I'll link to that in the show notes. So if you've liked our roundtable discussion, please give us a 5-star rating or reviews and share the episode on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Three Brothers Filmcast.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.